You're watching Experience Comic Culture and Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
What's up, the internet? That thing where right as Jay clicks the button to go live, your whole brain resets and you're hearing that Windows boot up music while the show is coming on and you're going, I'm supposed to be talking, but I seriously don't have a single thought in my head right at this moment. Please say something, say anything. Like it's like that episode of Friends where Ross's cousin thinks he's trying to kiss her, but he's not. He just can't think of anything to say. Yeah, that's me. It's a whole thing. This is Devil's Advocates, where we take common topics that are open for discussion in the comic book industry, and we talk about them, and we advocate and we debate. I am producer Kyle. I will be joined momentarily by Bronze Age Nerd, and this week's show is Comic Book MythBusters Part 2. Now, last week we established that one of us was Jamie and one of us was the other guy, whose name I can't remember. And last week we established that Jay is our Tory because Grant Imahara is sacred and we can't call someone Grant, and he doesn't have the legs to be Carrie Byron. So this is Comic Book MythBusters Part 2, and I'm stalling. Can you tell I'm stalling? I don't know why I'm stalling. I just am. We're going to get into it. We're going to open the phone lines. We're going to talk to you guys. But first, we're going to play the theme music. This is all right. I stalled as long as I could stall.
So full disclosure, just for everybody watching, I was coming into the show a little late, and I asked our esteemed colleague here, Kyle, to do the cold open for us because I didn't know if that was me coming in right on time to do it. Wasn't gonna be prepared for it, and we didn't want it to be a hot mess. So luckily, we avoided that.
Yeah, by putting a hot mess on the air. Although I will say this, like I had something planned. And then right at the last minute, it's like, that makes no sense. Don't do that. You're an idiot. Stop.
Hey, man, you got to stay water.
Well, and then when I decided, okay, I need to do something else, that was when my brain totally just went, meow.
That's the beauties of live YouTube television.
Well, it doesn't help that, like, we had a little break between the show before this one and this one. And I went and was watching TikTok. And I have friends who are they're one of the top amusement park and arcade game TikTok accounts in the world. They're the official TikTok influencer of Cedar Point Amusement Park. They've been flown all over the country to different amusement parks to try them out, try and beat their arcade games and things. And they were live closing down the local amusement park. And they were going through a haul of all the giant stuffed animals they won.
Ooh.
And I'll be honest, that really got me out of the brain pattern of what I usually need to do before the show. Like, get focused on the show and think about the show.
Yeah.
More or less thinking about, gee, I wonder what they're going to charge me for that 6 foot tall stuffed bear. Because they're going to sell me the 6 foot tall stuffed bear.
There's people that would probably pay a lot of money for that on the internet.
They do.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah. So, this is Comic Book MythBusters Part 2. We had a good week last week where we talked about some comic book myths, but there were so many more we didn't get to. We thought, gee whiz, we need to circle back around.
Right. Including, by the way, one thing I want to really point out: a couple of those suggestions came from you, the viewers, which is fantastic. We always talk about how much we love that. We love to see that. And this is a case in point. I just realized we prepped something for this show and we talked about possibly pushing that to next week. Are we going to talk about the viewer suggestions in today's episode, or do we want to push that to next week and make that its own episode?
I think we see what we get to.
Okay. So we will be covering your guys' questions. and we were so excited to do that. But we do have several MythBusters from last week that we had prepped that we're going to start talking about this week.
Right. And if you have ideas of things we should talk about, over in the comments, there's a link you can click on. And then you can fill out that form and you can tell us, hey, why don't you schmucks talk about this? And we'll be like, don't call us schmucks, but that's a good idea.
And the other thing you can do too, by the way, and I will go ahead and paste this link into chat. If you're watching the show, is join our Discord for the EXP, which is something I've been helping on the back end there with, trying to get it running. It still needs some work, but we're getting close to like 30 people in there, and we got some conversations going today about comic books and stuff. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming to the Discord. I recommend going to check it out. If you're on Discord already, may as well add it to your list and kind of see what's going on over there. And the link is in the chat.
There you go. So let's start with the first thing here that we kind of talked about last week. So last week we talked about, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch, the idea of that newsstand comics are rare and that you should handle comics with gloves. This week, our topics, the myths that we're going to try and bust, are a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Bronze.
Well, I don't know, because I'm not in your head, but I'm going to say that they have to deal more with, comic valuation, for one thing.
It's true. They're a little bit less cut and dry, I would say.
Yeah, there you go.
Some of the stuff we found last week, it was pretty easy to, hey, yo, this is what's real and this is what's not. Yeah. This week is going to be a little bit more difficult.
A lot more shades of gray on these topics.
So just bear with us. And if you want to call in because you disagree or agree or have an opinion on something, the phone line will be open momentarily. Because that's another thing my brain resetting made me forget to do. Is open the phone line here. So we're going to open the phone line, and we will take your calls at 567-318-6507, 567-318-6507. In just a couple of minutes here, we can start taking those phone calls. But in the meantime, we'll start with our first topic. Is to say, our first topic is... Browns, what's our first topic?
So we are going to cover the idea that the myth that your comic books will be worth millions someday. And this is something that, I love this topic because I can see both sides of it. And it really depends on a lot of factors. But the idea here is there are people out there that collect comic books because, or partially because, they want to invest in them and they want them to be worth a lot of money someday. And of course, we all know there are comic books that can be worth a ton of money. Your Action 1, your Detective Comics 27s, your Amazing Fantasy 15s. There's a lot of extremely valuable comics out there. There does tend to be one really, really common trend amongst most of those comics. They are quite old. But yeah, so that's something to consider. This is definitely a topic that I think a lot of people have strong feelings on. And I know one thing will come up anytime you talk about comic books and their values. This debate kind of creeps up that comics should never be collected for their value, and that is totally fine. If we're not going to, we say this all the time on the show, we're not going to yuck anybody's yum if that's how you feel about comic book collecting, or if the inverse is true. If you collect comic books because you want them to increase in value, that's fine. That's all bringing money into comic book collecting from my perspective, at least. And I think that's a good thing for everybody. But we do need to talk about the mindset, because the mindset is extremely important to collectors, because there are people that literally will waste a fortune on comic books thinking that they will increase in value. And that's how they collect. And that never happens.
Yeah, When we started talking about this concept, I thought the first line of my notes was one of the best lines ever that I've ever written on anything. And it's, if you believe your comics will be worth millions someday, always remember that your internal organs are worth millions now. That doesn't mean you'll get it.
Yeah.
everything is only worth what someone will pay for it. And nobody's going to pay GSX1 money for Donny Cates' Venom. And what that means, and what I mean by that is that value is in the eye of the purchaser and nowhere else. What a comic is worth is a result of what people are willing to pay. It's not some number that happens at the end of an algorithm.
Yeah.
Right? It's so and so, like, this book in this condition has sold for this much money. This book in better condition has sold for this much money. So your book in a middling condition has to fall somewhere in the middle. That's what that means. That's how those numbers come up. They're not, it's not like it's some magic somewhere. It's what the market will hold. And the fact of the matter is that I have 3 amazing fantasy 15s in my collection. The market knows what it will hold for those books. And at the same time, I know I can't get what the market will hold for those books for the copies I have. It's just not going to happen. So what the market says and what the book is worth are 2 different things. And in Comic Sam, I would argue it's not just a list on an app that tells you that each week. It's a list on an app that is cultivated by humans who have agendas. So if you want to get into whether or not that app should be used in this industry or not, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah. I will say this, even that is based on what the market will hold on a book, what people are willing to pay for a book. And if people are willing to pay stupid prices, that doesn't mean you should too.
Yeah, and by the way, shout out to Comic Sam. He's an awesome member of the community. Thanks for joining the show. Shout out to everybody talking in chat here. We will highlight and get to comments. It might be a little bit after you post them because that's how we kind of roll through the show, but try to flash them up on screen when we really, really appreciate what you guys are saying out there. So thanks for that.
So Sean asks, can you name at least a couple of things that might drive the worth of a comic up aside from what someone will pay? Rarity is obviously one. Sean, we're going to not use the word rarity. Scarcity is one. Because you can have an incredibly rare book that ain't worth jack. If no one wants to buy it, it's not worth anything.
Well, not only that, like, think about it from this perspective. We just talked about that app that, we all know we're talking about, Key Collector here. Mm-hmm. If that app pushes out a book, it doesn't matter, even if the book isn't rare at all. If nobody has it listed for sale on eBay, all of a sudden those few copies that are up there become very scarce in the current sense of the market. So those might get more money from bids because all of a sudden the demand is spiked and the available supply is low.
I heard a story yesterday from a podcast I was listening to about a period in 2014 where there was an influx of iPhones influx of cell phones on eBay. And these cell phones were asking about $1,000 more than what the phones were worth. These are phones that, because of their age and the time, should have been selling for about $500, and they were selling for $1,500 to $1,700. Do you know why? Bronze, do you have a guess? You're gonna be so angry when you hear.
Yeah, I've got no idea.
It's because they had Flappy Bird on them. Back when people were addicted to Flappy Bird and they took it off the market.
Because you couldn't download it again, but it was already on the phone.
Flappy Bird was not rare.
Yeah.
But it was scarce. So scarcity is super important. Rarity is not. Richard Rollins says it all the time. Just because it's rare doesn't mean it's worth money. It has to be scarce enough and have people want it.
Yeah, demand is a huge part of it.
Right. Now, some of the things that can drive a book's value up are things like the death of a creator, or whether it should or shouldn't, the announcement that a character is going to be in a movie or TV show. Mm-hmm. These are all things that drive the value up, but that doesn't drive up what someone's willing to pay for a book. So at the same time, you have to always be looking at both categories, right? What are people asking and what are they actually selling for? And there's a difference. So back to the topic of my comics will be worth millions someday. The answer is no, they won't. Or maybe they will.
It depends on your comics, for one thing.
Right. You have no way of knowing. If you're buying comics now and expecting them to be worth something someday, you have to be willing to not do anything with those comics other than care for, store, preserve, keep those comics around for as long as humanly possible. And then hand them down to someone who will do the same. And then hand them down to someone who will do the same. To the point where they are GSX level scarce. Right? To the point where the books are sought after and scarce.
Sorry, this is a weird clarification thing for me, because GSX is a weird example to me because it's really not even that scarce.
Right.
There's a lot of copies out there.
Right. But it is not all that often that it comes up for sale.
Right.
And
It's
not
that
all
availability.
that often, right. So it's scarce. They exist. They're not rare, but they're scarce because people who have them aren't moving them. Or Amazing Fantasy 15s are kind of the same way. Yeah. There's a ton of them out there, but the people who have them aren't moving them.
Yeah. And that's something that happens all the time. Like there are books out there that are really highly valued by collectors, not necessarily even in a financial sense, but just, I wish I could find that book someday at a garage sale. Like people really desire those books.
Right.
And so a lot of collectors think similar ways, obviously not the same way, but a lot of us have the same notions or characters that we really enjoy or things like that. And a lot of people are going to hold on to that book. There's always that argument like Ultimate Fallout 4 first appearance of Miles Morales. There's a lot of copies out there. And a lot of those copies are like graded 9.8 examples. There's a lot of the 1 in 25 Djurvik variant out there, really. And they're graded in high grades. But there's this like discussion about how big is Miles going to be over the next 20 or 30 years. And are those people that own those copies going to be willing to part with the copies they have if there's increased demand for that character on top of it's already a very highly demanded book?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the weird kind of texture balancing act you have to kind of process all these comics through.
Well, and it's you said it. It's what role is Miles going to have over the next 20 or 30 years? So a little bit of insight into my background, and this is not something I talk about all the time, just because it seems a little braggadocious. It seems a little much. But my family's collection at last insurance appraisal is over 7 figures in terms of value. And I'll tell you, we don't count anything after 1990 in that appraisal unless it's something like Ultimate Fallout 4 or a book that is a unanimous major important key, right? Unless everybody in the world sees it as an important key. Something like Hulk 181 or ASM 300 or, what have you, we don't count them because those books aren't mature yet. They haven't reached their full value yet.
Yeah.
In terms of what they're going to be. There's another caveat to that, and that's like with the Amazing Spider-Man series. Well, we count everything in the Amazing Spider-Man series up through current because the books at the top end, the old books, carry the weight. Right? If you can tell somebody, okay, this is a complete A cover of every Amazing Spider-Man 1 through now, that changes the value of what that Spider-Man collection is worth. Whereas just having some modern Spider-Mans don't change the value of your ASM number 1.
Yeah.
So
it's this bucket.
Right. It's this idea of knowing what your collection is and what's in it also is part of the answer to this question, right? When the question is, are my comics going to be worth millions of dollars someday? The answer is almost unequivocally no. But you can do things to your collection that will help you get there.
Yeah.
And that means collecting old books, not new books. Spending big money on old books and not new books, because those books are going to carry the weight of the new books until the new books are worth money. I like the line from Comic Sam. If you view it as an investment standpoint, if there's volatility in other investment sectors, then you have to see collectibles go up and down. I would argue that volatility in other sectors is a time to be investing in comics. If you are going to invest in other in pop culture things as an investment, when there's instability in other places, oftentimes that provides the best opportunities for you to make the right moves in this segment. Because people who have those books, when oil isn't doing well, people who have expensive comics and are also invested in oil are maybe selling their comic books to keep their oil, because oil is going to go up faster over long term.
Yeah, I think he's even including that in what he said in his comment there.
Right.
That is kind of the shifting focus, right? And there are people like art collectors and all kinds of people that collect in these different things. And that's exactly they kind of diversify their portfolio in times of, hey, I'll sell my shares in these things as they're starting to go down, and I'll invest in these things as they're starting to go up.
Right. And that's some of the best books I ever bought were guys who were like, look, I am getting married. I have to pay for a wedding. Time to sell these comic books I never thought I'd sell. Great. I'm never getting married. I'm buying comic books. It's that idea, right? When there's instability and other things, it's a great time to invest.
Yeah.
In comics. But I encourage people, there's so often the idea people have of investing in comics is going to your LCS and buying it for cover, and then by the end of the day throwing it on eBay for more than cover. That's not investing. That's short selling. That's the things that causes the housing market to collapse twice now.
Yeah.
That's subprime mortgages. It's all bad. But if you're willing to buy a book that you think is going to be important and hold on to it, you can really turn your investment into something. Right? It's comic day trading. It's not actually helping the economy. It's not helping your economy as a comic book collector or investor. One of the things we always say.
Hold on, though, because there's an interesting thing I'd like to explore there. So here's something that I got into a couple of years ago, and it's a slippery slope, just like day trading. But if you pay attention to previews, if you pay attention to solicitations, and you know what's going to happen in a comic book, and you go to your LCS or your online shop or whatever, and you pre-order 5 copies or 10 copies of a comic book that you have, like Spider-Man 7 with what Dan Slott was saying about that book. And that, I'm holding one for my collection and I'm selling 4 or 8 or 9 or whatever to finance my moving into a bigger book that's for my personal collection, for that GSX one or whatever. I say more power to you, because you're helping the comic book shop by giving them business, and you're supplying for the aftermarket that's going to FOMO for it, good or bad. I mean, there's going to be a demand.
Well, there's a level of liquidation that you can do in that regard to move up.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying if you buy Fire and Ice is out this week from Dynamite Comics, that book has a lot of potential to be a lot of big deal. So you pick up that book, and then by the end of the day, it's Wednesday, you're going to throw that on eBay. You're not going to get the most out of it you could get out of it. You have to play the game. Time is an important factor here.
Yeah.
Hey, Nick, are you still here? If you are, can you call in? I want to ask you some questions.
Pick up the phone.
Yeah. Anyway, something else that we need to talk about is that it goes back to that scarcity idea. And it's that currently print runs of comics are in an interesting and weird spot.
Yes.
When the comics that are worth the most money in the secondary market these days were created, they weren't meant to be kept. They weren't meant to be held on to. They were meant to be read and traded, and people wrote their names on things. It just was a different time. Then we went through a period in the 90s where everything was a gimmick. And the bubble burst. And these print runs exploded, millions and millions of copies. Right? Huge numbers of copies of the original Image lines and stuff like that was happening. I don't know how many Batman 60, what is it, 608 Breaking Batman?
That's
5 whatever it is.
97?
Whatever that is. Because I can
497?
see the gatefold cover, I can see the regular cover, I can see the collector's edition cover, and the difference is they all have different little strips basically stapled to the outside of the comic.
Yeah.
597, thank you, Comic Sam. I knew it was right there between 590 and 610, and I just couldn't remember what number it was.
I want to say it was 497 though. Because 608 is during Hush, and that was like years later. Yeah.
Maybe I'm just confusing a whole bunch
we
of
all
stuff
got discombobulated.
608 is Hush, and we're going to talk about Hush in a minute. That's why it's on my brain. But needless to say, you had these huge print runs, and then the bubble bursts, and the print runs come back down. And so you have this period of time where comics are more scarce. The print runs are lower. Things are happening. And so there's these weird comics from that era of Hush where the value is a lot higher because they weren't making as many.
Yep.
And then we transition into the now times where at one point, and I don't know how much, this is kind of what I wanted to ask Nick. But right now, Diamond wouldn't even handle your books if you couldn't sell 2,500 copies. That's not a lot. That's not even one per local comic shop. So the print runs can come down, but they don't because you have publishers who are printing 56 covers of a single book, or you have Marvel who's doing, there's a book this week out from Marvel where it's regular cover, spot foil, full foil, gatefold, where it's all the same piece of art. It's just cut different ways. And so those print numbers go back up. So books are not as scarce as they were. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. When I talk about time, people have 90-book Bronze Age comics, like early 90s, even early current and modern books, are starting to see that uptick that comes from time.
Well, right? and it plays into that demand too, because now you have collectors that have nostalgia for those time periods. They're at a point in their life. You can call it a midlife crisis. You can call it going back into your youth, whatever you want to call it, that want to go seek those things out again. And
finally,
so you're starting
disposable income.
Yes, exactly. Or, hey, I loved Biker Mice from Mars when I was a kid, and I heard there's a movie coming. I'm going to go seek that book out, and that kind of thing, right? I mean, that's a small example, but that's true for all, all those books that were showing up in like Wizard in the 90s that people were like, I wish I'd grabbed a copy of that. Well, now they think they can go do that.
Right. It's this idea of... The idea of the fast buck in comics is the idea that keeps propping this idea up, that your comics will be worth millions. It's the same, it's a get rich quick scheme. Buy now, sell now, because the sell-through window is now. You're actually not going to get rich quick. Your comics are never going to be worth millions because you're going to have sold everything that was ever worth anything and not held on to the things that are worth money for the long term. It's why so many of my comics are, pre-Bronze Age. They're gold and silver because those are the things that continually go up.
Yep.
So, we'll have the lowest average print runs in the current age of comics. So if we held on for longer periods of time, these modern keys may see massive jumps down the line. Exactly.
So that leads me to my point that I wanted to make about this discussion.
Go ahead.
So we're talking about really important chunks of what can make this true or not for people. The kind of books you have, and how they're performing over time. Now we have to look to the future, because the question is, my comics will be worth millions someday. And like you even mentioned, that could not necessarily be in your lifetime. That could be in your children's lifetime, your grandchildren's lifetime. But this is something I've talked about several times, and it really applies to this issue. Do we have strong comic readers and collectors 40 years from now, 30 years from now, even?
Right.
And that is a huge part of this equation, because when we talk about print runs, here's a great example. People, probably not a lot of people in this chat, but just people out there forget there were millions of comics printed. Like pre-code horror era, like comics were a huge business. There were tons of comics printed in the Silver Age. There were a little less printed in the Bronze Age, but still a lot. And then there were tons printed in the 90s. And yeah, now we're down to the case where if a comic sells $100,000, that's, or 100,000 copies, that's big numbers.
Huge numbers.
Yeah, I mean,
colossal numbers.
30 or 40 is really big for a standard issue. 30 or 40,000, that is. And you think about things like every Marvel exclusive has to have at least 3,000 copies printed, that kind of stuff. That all ties into that. So that kind of helps buoy those numbers, but that is kind of that manufactured scarcity piece as well. So what I'm talking about is you go down this path where we have less and less collectors. Now, they might be concentrating more of their income into collecting. They might be kind of power collectors or super collectors. They might really be putting a lot of energy and effort into their collections. But are their kids going to? Right. Because, a lot of collectors, I'm not alone. A lot of us are my age. I'm 40. I'm going to be 41 here in September, or older. We're not going to be around forever. We may not care about comic books forever. We need people to actually care about comic books and want to go out and collect those key issues that you're holding on to so dearly. And that's why, that's why Ultimate Fallout 4 is a really good example, because a lot of younger readers care about Miles.
Right.
Do a lot of younger readers care about some of those characters from the Golden Age or the Silver Age? We'll find out. I hope so. I really hope so.
Nick, can you call in real fast? I want to ask you a question about print runs. If you would, it'd be great. If not, it's cool. Something else that this kind of leads into, though, is this idea that reprints and later printings are valuable as well.
Yep.
This was the topic that, do you want to just hold off on this and talk about it next week? Because I do think it's a big,
I think this is a big topic, and I think we should. By the way, as we've been talking about it, it may not be 2 weeks from now or something like that. Print runs is something we should probably tackle at some point.
We should.
I think we should add that to our list. Hopefully the audience agrees. Let me know if you do in the chat. But I think the topic of second, third, fourth printings holding value, reprints holding value. I kind of jumped the gun for whatever reason doing some research on that today. But we talked about maybe giving that its full hour. And I really think that it could hold its full hour next week.
Let's hold on to that. And we'll see if I can get some information from some people to kind of lead into all of that too. So
I like it.
Yeah. So our other topic for tonight that we really wanted to kind of dig into is there's a twofold conversation here that we could probably touch two of these topics. The first one is that key issues are somehow more important than other issues. And I want to discourage that thinking, despite the fact that the sentence itself is pretty correct and self-explanatory.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So key issues are not the most important issues in a print run or in a comic series. Yeah, absolutely. That's another topic we can talk about. For sure. Jay put that on the list. Well, that's exactly where I'm going with this, Murdoch.
Yeah, love it.
There is a thought process happening in comics right now that says keys are definable. That there's a certain definition that keys have to meet in order to be considered keys. And certain apps and websites use that definition to give you information about keys and whatnot. The problem is that that's a decision that they have to make for themselves, that everyone has to make for themselves.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a good example, but there are Spider-Man issues in the 50s and 60s that don't show up on lists of Spider-Man keys because they're not a major key, or they're not a first appearance or a major death or something, something that has changed the trajectory of Spider-Man. They're a first appearance. They're an important book in the story, but because they don't feature a death or a new character or a first time of some kind, they don't get sorted into those lists of keys. And so that was something I thought would be an easy topic to kind of just to add in here, which is the idea that keys are more open to self-definition than they should be to the definitions of others.
Yeah, like I think the one that people would point out as like the opposite of the example that we're trying to prove, and I think it's kind of good to talk about it that way, is a first appearance. Yeah, a first appearance, especially if you're talking in relation to that character. Sure, that's a key we can all get behind. Defining what that first appearance is a whole nother ball of wax.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? And I think that for a lot of people, you could call the first issue of a series the first issue that's ever come out. Even if it's not a first appearance, that could be a key too, right? But when you get to deaths, or you get to first meetings, or you get to like some of these other kind of keys that we've seen, iconic cover,
Right.
that's something that's been considered a key recently. Then you start to get to the slippery slope, and your definition of what's an iconic cover versus my definition of what's an iconic cover could be completely different.
Right. No, and that's exactly it. It's when you think about, when you start using words like keys, when you start using words like not key, like when you start kind of trying to categorize the comics, you start sort of minimalizing what those comics are.
Oh, here's how you say it. It's like some people are trying to make it so it's keys and run filler, and that's it.
Right.
And
yes.
It's just such a simplistic way to view comic books, because some of the best stories can take place in pages of comic books that under that definition could be run filler.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're reading for the story, which is where we all started with comic books to get us to this point, that might not necessarily be true. I mean, if you think about it this way, there are some key issues out there that are not universally, but pretty much universally recognized because the story in it is just so good.
Right. Right. So it's Murdoch asked the question. So would an issue where a character appears in the last panel of the last page of the issue be a key, or would the next issue be a key where they actually talk and do stuff? Well, there's no reason they both can't be, and there's no reason that either of them should be.
Yeah.
Right? It's about the overall story. Right? Like the first appearance of a character doesn't make a book a key. There are Avengers books where if you look on certain apps and websites, this book is a key because it's the first appearance of David Letterman in the Avengers. Has nothing to do with the Avengers story. It's not important to the Avengers story that David Letterman's there. He's just there because when that book came out, David Letterman was a big deal. That book isn't a key.
On top of that, there's comic books where they're touted as a key, but it's the first appearance of a character who literally has one appearance and they're a background character. They're not even the main villain or something for that issue. So how is that necessarily a key? Yeah, and think about a really extreme example of that: Spider-Man swinging through the streets, and there's all those little people that are down on the street. Probably the first appearance of all those people, but they don't matter.
Right.
And even if they look up and go, "Wow," or something like that, that doesn't matter.
Right. But I just said that book with David Letterman isn't a key. If you love David Letterman, maybe it is a key for you.
Mhm.
Right? That's the important thing. So I've always felt like it's important when we're talking about key issues to categorize or to, explain why you feel that way about that book. This is a key because this, or I consider this a key because this. I'll never forget, I was doing a live sale and a guy came into my comments and I had to block him because I was selling the first appearance of Stiltman in Daredevil. And he was trying to tell me that because Stiltman wasn't in a Marvel show or movie, that the book wasn't a key. And I had to say on the air, well, that just means it's not a key to you, you moron. And then I banned him. So that was an interesting
Yeah, because it's I mean,
interaction.
Stillman is there are people. I'm not 100% sure if it's ironic or not, but there are people that love Stiltman. There are, I mean, like when there was a Stiltman Marvel Legends figure coming out, there was this whole thing where you could get like extra sets of parts of his stilt to make him taller. And people were going crazy trying to get the most stilt legs they could to extend the legs on Stiltman because they wanted the coolest version of Stiltman. You're going to tell me that those people wouldn't view the first appearance of Stiltman as a key? Of course they would.
Yeah. So can there be a key run? I would argue that things like Days of Future Past or Extinction Agenda in the X-Men are good examples of key runs.
Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Not necessarily just events, but there are certainly key runs. There's a key run in Spider-Man that I've been rereading that I don't think gets enough credit, which is Spider Island.
Yeah.
That was a great run for that time in the Dan Slott Spider-Man run, which is maybe not saying a ton, but
that was a Superior Spider-Man, right?
No, that was across all the Spider-Mans.
Okay. Well, but that was during the Superior era, right?
It kicked off in Superior too, but yeah. I'd consider Comic Sam. I consider Batman Hush a key run or Maximum Carnage. Right. There are certainly key runs.
100%, Sean. Great example.
Yep. Dark Pahonix. Absolutely.
Hooked on Phoenix worked for me.
Mm-hmm. There was a Nightwing recently with characters from the TV show The Office. Not a key, but my wife bought it because she loves The Office. There you go. Now that's a key to her.
Yeah.
I will say this, though. When Kevin Malone ascends to be the head of the Court of Owls in the Nightwing book, you're going to be glad she bought that book because that's going to be a major key. Kevin Malone, Secret Genius.
So he was the Scranton Strangler?
No.
Oh,
that was Toby.
I've seen it like proved he wasn't the Strangler, but whatever. I don't know.
It was Toby.
Okay.
He might have been the copycat Scranton Strangler.
That's what I've seen talked about.
No, Kevin Malone, Secret Genius. Mistake plus Clevin, get you home by 11. So, like I said, it's important to remember when you see the word, I think Creed was the original Scranton Strangler. And then when Creed got driven underground because people realized he never actually worked there in the last episode, it became Toby. Anyway, we can get into my Office fan theories later. When you hear somebody throwing around the word key, always make them clarify why they think so.
Yeah, here's a real good shortcut to collecting comics and having comics conversations around comics. Everything is relative, because this is an argument I had with somebody several times that I really respect them, but we have this argument all the time. First appearances, in the topic of keys. Well, this is what's a first appearance. There's no certified board that comes out and says this is the definition of a first appearance.
Right.
You know, we covered that on Devil's Advocates here. You know, this is what makes the character's first appearance. Like the classic example. We're not getting into it. Don't worry. Hulk 180, Hulk 181. Some people think 180. Some people think 181. It's up to you to define what that is. That is your own decision, like based on the criteria. And we're going to disagree about the criteria a lot of times, and that's going to happen. That extends to everything: the value of a comic, you know, the quality of a comic book, the collectability, whether or not it's a key. All these things are relative to somebody's own perspective, because there are not, you know, codified rule bodies that get us set up. And we haven't given anybody the power to do that, and I don't know if we ever should. There are people that want to, and that's, you know, that's its own discussion. If enough of us agree, I guess. But I think it gets down a slippery slope where the beauty of comic book, like the beauty of any kind of collecting, is that you get to make the rules for what your collection is going to be. There are people that, you know, they collect comic book covers with rain on it, or wedding covers, or kiss covers, or stories about, you know, a character dying, or whatever it might be.
Right.
That's awesome. That's your personal choice on what, you know. So a rain cover to that person in my example is going to be a key 100%. No one else is going to call it that probably, but they will. That's
Right.
awesome.
And so Sean or Michael Patrick Sullivan says, have to check me on this, but I consider Great Darkness and LSH a key run. But none of those issues meet the common definition of a key issue. The fact that there is a common definition of what a key is the problem. Right? That's the problem, is that there shouldn't be a common definition. Keys should be, we should consider everything a key that anyone wants to be a key. Which is a really dumb way of saying, don't tell me how to read comics.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how to read comics. You can't tell me how to read comics. That's the end of that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
Right? It's someone saying, oh, that book's not a key. It's just them trying to tell you what should matter to you. So the last, we have about 10 minutes. Do you want to hit the last topic we have for tonight?
I think we should. I think we could do it. And if we find that we are going to go over, and we could always roll it into the next MythBusters too, if we have more to talk about.
True. Or
which would probably be later on down the road, because we've hit it a couple weeks in a row. But there are more myths to crack.
Frozen burrito. That's right. It's all about the door you want to walk through. Yep.
That's good. I like that.
So last topic, and do you want to set this one up, Bronze, or shall I?
I am dancing around the fact that we might be talking around a different topic. We're talking about comic shops.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll set this one up because this is something I actually covered recently on my channel. I did a video series that was my biggest comic regrets. And the first entry in that series was the time that I sold about 90 to 95% of my comic book collection to a comic book shop. Kyle talked about it earlier in the show. You know, oh, the wedding coming up, I got to sell my comic books. You know, that kind of situation. Very much like that. I had a daughter on the way. We were moving into a smaller place. No room for the comic books. Tired of asking my friends to help me schlep them around and you know, try to find spots for them, and sold them off. So the myth we're going to tackle here is that comic shops rip you off when they buy your collection. And you know, we talked about at the beginning of the show. I'll give you the spoiler alert on this one, guys and gals. This is one of those situations where it really depends on the situation, because guess what? Not every comic book shop is created the same. Not every person has the same definition of what would be a ripoff. But there is this extremely common perception in the comic book community that when you bring your comics into a shop and they pay you literally pennies on the dollar for your comic books, that you are getting ripped off. And I have a feeling that, you know, Kyle and I'll probably be mostly in agreement on this topic as far as at least one element of that goes, which is that completely ignores what then has to happen for that comic shop to do to get rid of those comic books and turn a profit. And yes, in your comics that you sold for pennies on the dollar, you might have had a Hulk 340 and whatever and whoever that are worth way more than that. But you also probably had a lot of comic books that no one really wants to buy. At least not in that high demand spike, right? Like you probably had a lot of comic books that are going to sit for perhaps years in $1 or 50-cent or $2 bin. You know, shops are different about what they have. And that's a lot of storage space, you know, space cost, rent for lease, bags and boards that might need to be recycled. All kinds of different costs can come into that down the road. So to make it personal for me, yes, I sold my comic book collection. Yes, I regretted selling my comic book collection for the amount I sold it for and all that stuff. But that's on me because I didn't do my research. I was in a time crunch. I took my comic books down to a comic shop and wasn't willing to haul them back to say no. And I said, you know, hey, let's negotiate a little bit, but here you go. So what do you have to say about this one, Kyle?
So the first time I heard this was actually while I was a comic retailer. Someone came in to sell their collection or to have me appraise their collection and said to me, I'm not going to sell this to you because you're going to try to rip me off. And so I turned around and said to them, well, if you believe that, then don't even bring your comics in. I don't care if you have Amazing Spider-Man #1 and Amazing Fantasy 15 and Hulk 181 in your collection. I don't want to do business with you. And the important part is that it's business. It isn't personal. And so many people who sell comic books, especially when they're not flippers, when they're collectors who are in this because they enjoy the hobby, they oftentimes value their comics higher than the actual value of their comics.
Yep.
And the unfortunate thing about that is that I don't have an emotional attachment to someone else's comics.
Yep.
As a retailer. So I can't pay you what you feel like they're worth. I can only pay you a percentage of what they're actually worth. So one of the things that was always important to me to explain to people is I would tell people straight up what website I was using to price their books. I would tell them straight up what I was going to charge for a certain book. And I would tell them straight up what I was willing to pay for it. And if they were good with that, then we made a deal. And if they weren't, then they weren't. And so often comic shops try to obfuscate. They try to dance around the truth of what their processes are.
Yeah.
To keep them secret. And that's where this myth comes from. Right? If somebody brings me slabs, I'm looking them up on Go Collect. And I'm looking at what fair market value is. And I don't care if you've paid more than that for it. I can only charge that for it. So if I buy your key issue, okay, we have Go Collect open because we were going to talk about it. We're going to talk about something on Go Collect. So if I'm buying your Batman 608 second printing, which is the Jim Lee, it's Batman doing Jim Lee pose on the first issue of Hush. Right, and you bring me that graded 9.8, I can see that the FMV on that is $550. I know that I can get $500 for that book. I can only pay you $250, $300. If you want to get $500 for it, then you need to list it on eBay and pay the listing fee. And then you need to deal with the people who want to offer you $175 on eBay all day and all night. And then when you do find a seller, you've got to find a comic mailer and a box and pay the insurance and do all of this kind of stuff to sell it.
And the fees and the taxes.
So at the end of the day, you're going to wind up making less than I offered you. because you're going to have to buy all this stuff. You're going to have to build this infrastructure. I have it already. So it's this idea of you need to understand the reality of the situation and come at it from that point of view rather than having feelings.
And like at the end of the day, I don't think there's a single example where I can think of this not being true. I'm sure I'll be proven wrong here in a second. If you have any kind of collectibles or collection, you will always get more money selling it individually by yourself. By the way, this is true of your car. It's true of your house. You're going to get more money. Now you will incur risks like we talked about. You have to be prepared to deal with those risks. And some people are willing to get less money, pay somebody else to deal with those risks, which makes perfect sense. Depending on the situation, you might choose to go that way. But yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, a shop's assuming a lot of potential risk here. Also, the value of that book may be something that's in flux, and maybe it's worth $500 now. And 6 months from now, when they're finally ready to sell it, or it's come back from CGC or whatever it might be, it isn't worth that much.
I will give a great example of this. Ironically, when Venom #3, which is a book we're going to talk about came out, I had a ton of people who were who were buying this book, and it was great, and I enjoyed selling it. It was a good book. But they were running out and spending money to get Donnie Cates and Ryan Stegman's autographs, to get the book slabbed, to have it come back a 9.8, and then they want to sell it back to me at whatever marked up price eBay was saying it was going for at that moment. This is a book that's still on the wall, right? Like, I'm still selling raw copies for $4.99, right? And they're trying to bring me graded copies and say, well, it's $600. I gotta get $400 for it because it was hot in the moment. And I told everybody, you paid to get this slabbed, you paid for the signatures. Signatures are worth $25 a piece in my mind, and the slab's worth another $40. So I will give you, $95 because that's what you paid. I'm not going to give you a cent more. And people would get all angry and walk out, and it's fine because they go on list them on eBay and they make their money, and who cares? But comic shops are not trying to rip you off. What comic shops are trying to do is make sure you still have a comic shop to come to. I'm paying the electrical, I'm paying the power, I'm paying the water, I'm paying the rent. I'm buying the new books from the distributor. You're not. So I have to factor all of those costs into whatever I'm going to offer you on something.
Okay, hold on. So I do have to address this is devil's advocates. I got to address the other side of this for a second.
Mm-hmm.
That is, in my opinion, the way that it works 99 times out of 100. But like anything in life, there is the flip side here, where there are comic shops that are less than reputable and will try to, like you talked about, the amazing way to do it. Here's the method I'm using to price your books. Here's what I value it at. Here's what I'm going to sell it for. That's you're arming your customer or client or business partner in that situation with information. That's great. There are retailers out there that will do the exact opposite of that. They'll obfuscate all that information, like you mentioned, intentionally to try to get a better price. Now, is that criminal or dishonest? No, because if you'd done your research, you could have walked in there and known exactly what your stuff is worth, which, by the way, unfortunately, it seems like only the people that do that are the ones that they go find the one time that comic book sold as part of some weird auction on eBay in a 9.9 and it sold for $4,000, but really it's a $3 book. And then they assume that they have a $1 million collection on their hand. And I know that happens too, but it's one of those things where it can happen. And so the answer is try to arm yourself with some research before you go into a comic book shop. to sell your comic books. Doesn't mean you have to know the exact value. You don't have to become an expert or a historian about the comic books that you're trying to sell. It'd be awesome if you did, but you don't have to do that. But you can find a comic price guide. You can find, we talked about Key Collector earlier. It would be nice to go through your collection with that if you have no idea what you're looking at, and at least see like, oh, I know these books, people are interested in these. Maybe I should see what these are worth. There are different ways you can approach that. Now, a lot of people, simply put, don't want to do that. And they sell a comic book to a comic shop, and then they find out that they had something that was worth a lot of money. And there's this weird thing that happens then where they assume every comic that they sold at that comic shop is worth that much money or worth way more than it was. And that's what you got to remember. It kind of goes back to what I said when I first started talking about this. Just because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 valuable comic books in that collection, that doesn't mean that every comic book you're selling is worth anywhere near that much. Like Kyle said, that emotional value that you're attaching to those comic books does not transfer to the next owner. And it's one of those things too, where it's like a loss leader situation in a retail store. You might have 5 comics I really want to buy, but you're going to make me buy 400, 500, 3,000, 5,000 more that I don't really want to buy, but I'll do it to get those 5.
There's another part of this that is an inside baseball thing that I wasn't going to go into. And it's the thing I preach to people now when I work with them. And it's knowing your numbers. It's the mistake I made as a retailer. It's why my store wound up having to close, because I was in, between the pandemic and the situation I put myself in because of this. It's the thing I learned. You have to know your numbers. If somebody somebody mentioned it. I sold, somebody mentioned it earlier. Sold like 8 boxes or 10 boxes for $80 or something. Yeah, sold off 10 boxes worth of 10 long boxes worth of comics for $80.
And I'm being nice here.
And I'm just being nice, a bunch of junk.
Love that.
Here's the thing. So whoever it was paid you $8 a box. If we say there are 200 comics in a long box, which there are more than 200 comics in a long box, right? They're paying roughly, I can't do the math, 4 cents a book for $8 a long box. Okay? If the retailer doesn't know that they paid 8 cents a book for the long box, they can't adequately charge for that long box. I would too. I'll be real honest, Sam. Right. So for 4 cents a book, if they pull out 3 books that are worth $10 and 3 books that are worth $5, now they've made half of their money back. Over half of their money back off of 6 books out of 8 long boxes. Right? They have to know where their money is, and they have to know what they have to make. So now they've taken 6 books out of 8 long boxes. They've got 8 long boxes in order to make $35. How do I make $35 on 8 long boxes? I start at $1 a book. And then once I've sold everything, I can mark those books down. Once I've sold my $35, I've broken even. I can mark those books down to $0.25 if I want. But knowing how much you pay for a book is a super important thing for a comic book retailer. And it's important for a buyer too and a customer, because when you come in looking for a discount, you have to remember what someone paid for something.
Yeah.
If I offer you 20% off on a pull list, just know that I may be offering you half or more of my profits. Right? You just need to know that kind of stuff. And it's important at the same time when you go in to sell to do your research first. Like you said, spend some time looking stuff up. I had a guy, and I'm still, this guy and I still are fighting about this. This is 6 years ago now. Guy brings in 5 long boxes, says he needs to sell them to buy a suit for his wedding. And I start going through and there's major keys, man. All kinds of killer stuff. You know, first Deadpool, first Cable, like real good stuff.
Okay.
One of the books in there was Mad Love, first appearance of Harley Quinn. And so I paid him based on that book being in there for all the books. And based on these other things. And then he comes back a few days later, hey man, I didn't mean to sell that book. I didn't mean to include that. I want to keep that, and we're going to frame it and hang it up in our house, me and the wife. She likes Harley Quinn. I like Joker. You know, didn't mean to sell it. So now I have to know what I paid per book to tell him what I have to charge him to give him his book back. Right? And I'm going, dude, this is a $100 book right now, and I paid you $100 for this book. So if you want it, you owe me $100. I won't sell it out from under you, but I need $100 back. And we had to have this negotiation about, this is what I paid for this book. This is what, you know. So knowing those numbers and knowing what retailers are going to pay for you helps you stop from being ripped off. That's the last point I was going to make. So when somebody makes you an offer, ask them what they're offering you that for and why that's the offer they came to. If they won't tell you, then it's up to you to determine whether or not you feel comfortable making that deal.
Yeah, and my last point about it is kind of one additional point here, which is for a lot of people, and again, this could be like over an offer up transaction where you're selling something. It doesn't have to be about comic books. For a lot of people that don't do negotiations very often, the interaction with somebody who does do negotiations often can come across as one-sided. And that can be a very intimidating temporary relationship you have with somebody, right? Where it can feel like there's an inverse power dynamic and you can get stressed out, scared, mad when you think about it later on. Why did I do that? Why did I handle it that way? Look, you got to be prepared to going into selling anything, your car, your old tennis rackets, your golf clubs, or whatever, comic books, with that idea that, you know, there's going to come down to a point where either they're going to say a number and you're going to be like, I love it. It's probably not going to happen. Somebody's going to say a number and the other person's going to go, I want more. And the other person, I want less. And, you know, that's negotiating. So if you have your bottom part of your range and your top part of your range that you're looking for in mind beforehand, you realize you're talking to somebody who does negotiations on an almost daily basis, if not an hourly basis, there's going to be some differences there. Practice with your partner first, practice with a friend, you know, that's an intimidating aspect of this that I think it's part of what gets a bad reputation on this topic, because people get so frazzled in that part of the process. And then they walk away and they have that shower thought the next day, like, why did I say yes?
Yep.
I wanted twice that.
Right. I'm going to give the best piece of advice I ever got when it came down to negotiating. Anyone who's not willing to let you walk away and come back and make the same deal a day later is not being a fair dance partner.
Yep.
And that was my dad teaching me when I bought my first car. Right? We had talked about a price. We had come up with terms. We were all ready to go. And I says to the guy, I don't know. I got to think about it. Let me come back tomorrow. And he goes, well, the price is only good today. I'm not going back to that guy. I didn't go back to that guy the next day. We were done. Right? It's anybody who's not willing to say, this is my offer. This is why I'm willing to make you that offer. Think about it and get back to me. Right? Now, if that guy selling that car had said, hey, if you want to come back tomorrow, I will honor this deal, but I'm not going to hold the car for you. That's well within his right. Right? Because he's the seller. He can still sell the car. But anybody who's not willing to at least extend that offer is not acting honestly. Murdoch, the question becomes, do you care about money, time or money? I had already done my research on my books by figuring out what I wanted to keep versus the rest. Right.
Yeah.
Right. It comes down to, you care more about time or money? And the answer is, if you care more about your comic books, take the time to get the money.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, the final piece of advice that I'll offer on that whole topic is, if that's how you're starting to feel at any point in the transaction, realize that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing.
Right.
You don't necessarily I'll go back to my little video I made. The real trick there, the reason that I don't like absolutely kick myself over that decision to sell those comic books, is because the other thing I did is I took 4 short boxes worth of comic books out of that collection that meant the most to me.
Right.
And those were my, my childhood X-Men comics, the ones that I cared about the most, right? G.I. Joe, that kind of stuff. And that matters to me. Whatever matters to you, Stiltman, whoever it is, right? That's the stuff that you really should, like, maybe, I'm going to pull this out before I ever go to the shop. Or I'm going to say, like, hey, you know what? Let me take a day to pull some of my favorite stuff out of here. And then I'll let you look at it again. I'll show you what I pulled out, and we can have another conversation. If they're not willing to let you do that, yeah, something is afoot.
And Ed, the answer to that is yes. I think I'll give an example, and then we can wrap up. We can get out of here. It's 11:15 my time.
Yep.
I am currently going through and selling sound equipment. Over the years, I've developed quite a collection of equipment I no longer use. I go to a store here locally that buys used gear. And the answer to what is a fair expectation when you go into a store depends on what you're selling and what their inventory is and what they think they can get for it. If I take them the console mixer that's next door, the 36-channel console mixer that's bigger than anything they have in their store, they're going to offer me less because of the amount of floor space it's going to take up and how long it's going to take to sell. Whereas if I take them this microphone, which is a sought-after, easy sell microphone, they're going to give me more. So when you know what you're taking in, you can kind of start to gauge that 40, 50, 30, 60 sort of expectation, right? Big books that are quick sellers are probably going to get you a little bit more because it's going to be cash wrapped up a lot less long.
100%.
And it's going to have more upside. Whereas important books that are harder to sell are going to get you a little bit less because they're harder to sell. When I was buying collections, I was always looking at one of the things I always factored in, and it's not something you can just say, this is the number, right? Is, do I have a buyer for this book in 30 days? Because I also had another policy that's not necessarily common in the comic book industry, which is if I buy your books, they get new bags and boards, and they sit in a long box for 30 days after I buy them. Because I don't want the cops coming in and telling me that something I bought was stolen. And I've already sold part of it. So I went Pawn Stars rules on that deal.
Smart. A lot of people don't do that.
Right. So, but it's in 30 days. Do I have someone who I can pull this book out of this box and sell it to immediately? And on those books, I'd pay closer to 60%. Because I'm going to tie this money up for 30 days. But then, man, 31st day, I'm getting my money out. So I don't have to be as stringent. So it's just knowing that research, doing your research and knowing, oh, this is a book that's got a minor key, or this is a book that has a lot of sold listings on eBay recently. People are looking for this book. Help you to know. Mark, if you buy my books, they self-destruct. Bro, if I could figure out how to do that. I have so many copies of Warriors of the Plasm #1 from, I don't even remember the name of the company anymore, that I would just send to my enemies. Like, huh? Who
Defiant?
Yeah, Defiant. But I would just send them to people I don't like their glitter bombs. If they would do that. I would love that.
That's funny. So everyone makes the joke. It seems like everyone makes a joke for common comic that nobody cares about. Turok 1 is the one I hear all the time. My go-to is Warriors of Plasm #1 because that's the book that I feel like I can go anywhere that sells comic books, an antique store, a garage sale, whatever. Maybe it's just in my areas of mine. I feel like I could pull that book out.
No, I mean, it's true. It's everywhere. But oh yeah, it was Jim Shooter for sure, Reef. But no, that's kind of the thing, right? Like if I got a collection that had a Warriors of the Plasm #1, I actually deducted $1 from my offer. Because by the time I closed my store, I had 2 long boxes full. Like just a ridiculous amount. So, I would tell people, look, you can keep this one, or you could sell it to me for $1 less than I was going to offer you before.
I've actually used that technique in reverse. I've been negotiating buying comics, and I have some weird taste, right? Like I buy what I really enjoy, and I enjoy some weird stuff that I know is trash. And I've been like, well, yeah, but I'm taking this, and this off your hands. So like, cut me a deal. It totally works, by the way, because they're like, yeah, you're kind of right.
Well, right. I mean, that's definitely always an option. So that's the other thing. Last little note to avoid being ripped off, especially if you go into a comic store that you're feeling like is maybe being a little less than honest. Trade.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have something there you want? And can you get some swappity do? Is always what I always told people is like, look, swappity do is good. You bring me something you're ready to get rid of, and you take out something that you want, and I can give you a little more cash if you do it that way, because now I've got, this, we can work out a deal. So just always be willing to take alternative forms of compensation.
Yep.
Always get a receipt. That's the last thing. Always get a receipt.
100% on the receipt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've talked an extra 16, 20 minutes here.
Bonus time.
I'm so hungry.
It's true.
Eddie, message me. Shoot me a text. And we'll talk on that one. I may be able to help you with that. But yeah. So we will see everybody next week for... What show is this? Devil's Advocates. Sorry, it's my 4th show in a row. For Devil's Advocates, where we'll be talking about a different topic.
But that topic will be second printings or later printings versus the first printing, and also as kind of an addition onto that, reprints and whether or not they're valuable. It originally was going to be a MythBusters style episode, but I think it's really just a good topic to talk about all around for Devil's Advocates.
It's its own topic.
Yeah, and so we've blown that up. And I'm just going to say this one more time, everybody. That is because there were multiple people in the chat last week giving us great suggestions. There's already 1 or 2 we pulled from this chat as well that I've pulled aside that I'm going to add to my list. We love it. Keep those coming. If you guys want to hear us talk about something, that makes it even better. And we can't wait to talk about those, hard to talk about comic book topics that you want us to tackle.
Right. And if there's a topic you want us to tackle, there's a link over in the comments over there that you can click on, and you can fill out the little form, and both Bronze and I will get an email, and y'all can participate that way. I do want to mention Jay put it up starting next Sunday. The Experience is giving away 20 slabs because we got to 2,000 subscribers. So be watching our show. We may or may not have one. I don't know yet. I imagine we will. I can't imagine why we wouldn't. But, maybe I'll keep it. And no, I'm kidding. We will have 20 slabs to give away over the shows next week to celebrate the 2,000th subscriber. And then we will have a great big announcement coming in just a few days. So big that it's almost a century in the making. And that's really hard to say because I've only been around for a third of that. So keep your eyes peeled for those big announcements here on The Experience. Fill out the form if you have something you want us to talk about. And until next week, for Bronze and producer Jay, I've been producer Kyle, and this has been Devil's Advocates.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere The Experience is all the time.